Jesus' greatest act of faith was to step fully into the unknown and disorder of death, whilst chaos ensued all around him, to let go of all control and put his trust in God. But when Paul comes to set up the church, he advocates for structure and order to be maintained. What do Jordan Peterson's ideas about chaos and order tell us about how to understand these different ways of letting go and holding on? Hello and welcome to this video on dealing with complexity at church. We're exploring frameworks and models and how they apply to the conversations we might have. This video looks at Jordan Peterson's ideas around chaos and order and the hero's journey. Chaos and order are archetypes, highlighted by Jordan Peterson, that resonate with our already outlined model, in that the left hemisphere, with its ability to analyse, atomise and categorise, loves order, and that the right hemisphere, with its ability to deal with paradox, ambiguity and implicitness, isn't so fazed by chaos. Chaos is the place in which the order of our current structures fall apart and the floodwaters engulf us. Experienced by Jonah, both when God blurs the lines of who should be forgiven and, more literally, when swallowed by a great fish. Chaos is also the place of uncreation and disorder, but also holds the potential for rebirth and renewal. Order is what is wrestled out of chaos. Order masters chaos, builds up a wall against it, and maintains a sense of control. Order, however, can become complacent, become rigid and therefore stagnate through a lack of change or adaptability. Its walls therefore atrophy and are breached again by chaos. In his biblical series of lectures, Jordan Peterson highlights Eden as an archetypal paradise, comprising of both a wall for structure and a flowing river that brings just enough change to sustain the order of the garden in which mankind plays a cultivating role. Now, when Adam and Eve disrupt the divine order of things in the garden by taking on themselves the responsibility to order what is good and what is evil, they are thrown out into chaos, and therefore have to wrestle their own sense of order and stability from the wilderness that they now find themselves in by the sweat of their brow. They are trying now to secure their existence through their own means and not with God's provision. But there is that promise of a re-establishment of order through their offspring given by God. Jordan Peterson sees this journey from order to chaos and back again as the hero's journey that can be found in many myths and in popular culture. For example, George and the Dragon, or he highlights Pinocchio and The Matrix as more recent examples. It seems to me the ultimate hero's journey is Jesus' own journey in faith. He enters the chaos and unknown of death itself to establish a new order. But none of this is done in his own strength, but through faith in the love of the God who presides over both good and evil, order and chaos. We can see this also again in Job, where God asks Job if he can tame Leviathan, which is a chaos monster in chaos waters. And he's effectively asking Job, can you bring about a better order than the one that I have? And all this after Job has been relentlessly making futile attempts to order his friend's view of the world and how God works in it. So we then have another perspective on the two ways we can attend to the world and an indication of the way in which we need to move between them, which might be able to help us build up a bigger picture and a greater sense of the whole. This relates to our topic of complexity because it highlights, as we've already seen, how within groups some may want to open up to a new possibility that others will see as chaotic, whereas others will want to close down to a certainty that some will find restrictive. And we need to be able to balance these needs. Now, when it comes to bringing about order in the world, I feel Jordan Peterson and Iain McGilchrist provide a different emphasis, both of which might be able to help us here. Jordan Peterson often highlights the nested structures within our worldviews that make sense of how to act in the world. For example, the differing meaning and relevance of a head covering in a church group may depend on something as small but as fundamental as the meaning of one or two Greek words. Change that one word and you may disrupt the entire hierarchy of nested structures that give you that interpretation. When we get all our levels in order and they align, we feel confident that we're right and can stand strong in our convictions. However, we do have to be careful because this layered view sees the levels as component building blocks with greater meaning being built on existing, narrower layers of understanding. To change one fundamental layer at the base could bring the whole thing crashing down into chaos. And so this can lead to getting everything in order and perfectly aligned, but becoming fearful of ever touching it again, making this ordered view one that can atrophy if it's unable to integrate a right hemisphere perspective on the world. And this is the perspective emphasised by Iain McGilchrist, which is one of more of an adapted, networked approach that allows for and deals with more complexity, paradox, and ambiguity, in which all of the elements found in the layers are understood not just as parts, but as whole worlds in and of themselves. For example, that one Greek word we were talking about before is not just part of a sentence, it has its own etymology, its own origins, ways in which it's used, ways in which it can be a metaphor. It sees the word as alive and dynamic, rather than dead and static. There's a whole world contained within that one part of the sentence, and to define it concretely is to collapse a potential network of meaning down to one option that really limits our way of knowing and understanding its meaning. This undefined, networked worldview sounds like chaos to many people and induces a lot of fear, but it is able to deal with far greater complexity. I hope we can see that there is a need for order to give structure and provide foundations for actions in the world. But we also need to give that order over to the right hemisphere take on the world when it requires expanding and opening up, allowing for fresh perspectives and the integration of new information. The integration of the things we didn't even know we didn't know. Whichever way you may feel you are predisposed towards, it's important that we actively listen to each other's views so that we can really hear and understand where another person is coming from, but also to understand ourselves, where our impulses and intuitions seem to stem from. And this video series will look at some of those ways in which we can do that. In the next video, we will look at John Vervaeke's ways of knowing. Do we attend to God, to others, and the situations we face through a list of propositions, or by being perceptive and participating with them in the co-creation of the future?